Let's move on to Ukraine, Patrick, and we're starting off here with what the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, so this week is the 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and obviously people are wondering, have we learned the lessons of the Cuban Missile Crisis 60 years on? We're talking about the situation in Ukraine. The parallels are eerie. The only difference is, and you might argue, and I do encourage people to go to 21st Century Wire. There's an interview which is in the feature section with former CIA analyst Ray McGovern, who briefed many presidents and who began his career exactly during the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I had a chance to sit down and talk with him about his experience back then, how he interpreted that event in history, and what the parallels are today. And what Ray McGovern said, former CIA analyst, said that now JFK, the position of JFK, is really being played by Vladimir Putin in 2022. And so that's probably going to be difficult for some Westerners to get their head around, but he explains it very well. And so Moscow is under a direct threat that's equal or much more so even than the threat that the United States believed it was under with the placement of certain types of missiles and military equipment in Cuba, 90 miles off its coast of southern Florida. So I think there's a lot to learn there. Ray eloquently laid this out, and I do encourage people to go watch that. So, but I don't know if you had a chance, Mike, to catch any of Vladimir Putin's speech at the Valdai Club this past week, but it was certainly incredible.
No, I haven't seen that yet.
Well, I think there's a number of these speeches that are by either Lavrov or Putin or Maria Zakharova that are just completely on point, but they're really calling out. The gloves are kind of off, no longer playing nice and diplomatic speak. So here's some highlights from Putin's speech, which I think are pretty significant in terms of how clear they were. The so-called West, he said, which is, of course, a theoretical construct, since it is not limited and clearly is a highly complex conglomerate. But I will say that the West has taken a number of steps in recent years, and especially in recent months, that are designed to escalate the system-wide crisis. And he goes on to be sure the latter was, of course, not done on purpose. Uh, there is no doubt about it. The destabilization of energy markets resulted from a number of systemic missteps made by Western authorities. So he's pointing to a number of policies with regards to energy that created the perfect storm. The situation was further aggravated by the destruction of the pan European gas pipelines. Global power is exactly what the so called West has at stake in its game, but this game is certainly dangerous, bloody, and I would say dirty, says the Russian president. And he goes on, it denies the sovereignty of countries and peoples, their identity and uniqueness, and tramples upon other states' interests. And he moves on. Humankind is at a forefront, either accumulating problems, eventually get crushed under their weight, or we work together, even imperfect ones, as long as they work, can world a more stable, safer place. And finally says, I have always believed in the power of common sense. The West will have to start a dialogue on equal footing. Those are just highlights from this speech. Obviously, there's a lot more in there. And if you want to see the full context, that's available a number of portals online, so not difficult to find that text. But I think it's amazing because now the diplomatic dialogue that's normally makes these sort of exchanges much softer and more palatable between countries and people. I think Russia's no longer, they've dispensed with all of that, and they're really just calling out what they see with their view of what global power politics currently looks like. And they're really decrying and calling out the West and NATO and mainly the United States and Britain's main role as disruptors, saboteurs, and saying, "Well, is this what the West has become? Saboteurs, disruptors, and is this effectively the Great Game 2.0? I mean, or are we still playing off the same geopolitical script that we have been for hundreds of years? And the answer is yes. So he's just articulating this with a lot more detail.
Alex.
It's instructive as a microcosm of this just to contrast that speech with what we've heard from Vanessa about the BBC Ukrainian strategy. Now, I know that people might misinterpret the idea of BBC Ukrainian strategy. It's not meant by the person who wrote that dodgy document as BBC strategy for the Ukraine. It's meant to mean the strategy of BBC Ukrainian, which is a brand like BBC Persian. However, the part that Vanessa rightly highlighted was that BBC Ukrainian as a service has a, quote, distinctive style and content. In other words, London has requirements for Kiev. And people might not like to hear it. They might think it a facile or a naive point, but Putin is saying the Ukrainians, not that he names them individually, but nations, including Ukraine, have a uniqueness in the world. The Western response, and Putin quite rightly says the West is a dissipate beast and is now talking about itself as a global or an aggregate West. But the idea there is that the only distinctiveness is how the centers in the West engineer and manipulate the people involved. You even see that if we look at the Twitter segment just now with the European Union's, or more particularly the European Commission's response to Elon Musk's tweet. As he took over Twitter, he tweeted yesterday, "The bird is freed." And the competent European Union Commissioner for Twitter, Thierry Breton, replied in a quote tweet, "In Europe, the bird will fly by our EU rules," and with a hashtag underneath DSA, which is the forthcoming European Union's Digital Services Agreement. No room for distinctiveness there, whether of individuals or of nations.
Yes, and just so everybody knows, the Digital Services Agreement is the EU's equivalent to the Online Safety Bill. So anyway, let's move on to Ukraine and media and so on, particularly the Myrotvorets website. And I want to highlight this interview. It's in French on the Réseau International website, and it's entitled Myrotvorets Extrajudicial Executions. And this is featuring a former French military general, retired General Dominique Delawarde, saying, this is a translation, so it may not be quite up to Alex's standards, but nonetheless, it's saying extrajudicial executions are now the rule, not the exception. What is unprecedented today is the magnitude is the magnitude of this mode of terrorist action, its open and uninhibited nature, and the active complicity of the governments of the major Western countries, which ensure the financing and impunity of Myrotvorets and assassinations who do the job. Ukraine could not on its own draw up the lists of opponents to be killed across the entire planet and manage the collection and publication of data on each of the targets. For me, there is no doubt that the neoconservative and globalist Anglo-Saxon diaspora is at the helm in this affair. Only alliance of major services such as the Mossad, the MI6 and CIA can obtain this result thanks to its antennas or planetary relays. Now, I know you've got some thoughts on this, Vanessa. You're muted.
Yeah, this ties in very much to a recent initiative by the Foundation to Battle Injustice, which, funnily enough, is known as the FBI. Which was established to push back and to campaign against the Myrotvorets site and to demonstrate the fact that it is basically NATO produced. And the latest initiative is against the CEO of Cloudflare, F-A-R-E, Matthew Prince, who Cloudflare is effectively hiding the IP address of this website, of the Myrotvorets website. So he is effectively, Matthew Prince is effectively complicit in this website and the assassinations that are being carried out as a result of the establishment of this website. So I urge people to use their Twitter platform, if they have one, to tweet out to this Matthew Prince, CEO of Cloudflare, and to question why he is supporting a list that has on it people like Roger Waters, Eva Bartlett, myself, a number of independent journalists, and more than 300 children.
Alex.
People who are watching on repeat could go back a couple of minutes to see the graphic for themselves again, but how instructive that the first slide in this segment, which shows the Myrotvorets website logo, has an oversized Ukraine sitting astride the globe with a bunch of networking lines, which could look like latitude and longitude lines, but they're networking on the center of the Ukraine. Myrotvorets, which means peacekeeper, it's a ghastly misappropriation of blessed are the peacemakers from the Beatitudes. And underneath is the Cod Latin motto, pro bono publico, for the public good, something that we've been much exercised with in our discussion of human rights and law, that you can get away with all manner of evil in the name of the public good. I would say that the pro bono publico as a slogan justifying or condoning assassination is simply the equivalent of in our day of the Nazis für ihre Sicherheit, for your safety and security.
Yeah, okay. And Patrick, on Wednesday's program, we highlighted the open letter from 30 Democrats, members of the Democratic Party, calling on Biden to begin negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, or at least encourage negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. It seems there's been some pushback on that. You're muted. Sorry, hold on. Go ahead. No, we've got a. Sorry, Patrick, we've got a slight technical problem there. Let's just try again.
Yeah, can you hear me okay,
Yes,
Mike?
yes, you're good. Yeah.
Yeah, they withdrew the letter. They withdrew the letter. This is from the Progressive Caucus of the Democratic Party. They withdrew it, and they wanted to clarification they had to make without being torn to pieces by the pro-war wing of the U.S. mainstream media, which is the entire mainstream media, is that we still support aid and military aid to the regime in Kiev. Sorry, I used the term regime. That's a pejorative term. To the regime in Kiev. And so they're saying, but we still support diplomacy. So what's amazing is that they got crushed for basically first saying that we need to pursue a diplomatic solution. And I don't know if you covered this or not, but this letter might have been in part anyway, a direct result of the intervention by independent U.S. Senate candidate Diane Sayre at the Senator Kirsten Gillibrand event, where she challenged her and told her about this kill list, the fact that Diane Sayre's on the kill list, and that she's received no acknowledgement or much less any protection from the U.S. government on this. And so there's a whole story to do with that. But the other thing is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's one of the core leading members of the Progressive Caucus, she got doorstepped at one of her town hall events. And it really put on the spot by anti-war protesters saying, why are you supporting this proxy war in Ukraine? You're pushing the country to the edge of nuclear war. And so that says two things. One is that actual activism, actual people on the ground locally getting active can actually push an event like this, whereby the Progressive Caucus was scared about their bona fides, their progressive bona fides being put into question, especially ahead of the midterm elections. So that's a direct result of individuals who took action and put pressure on this caucus to put that letter out. It's caused this storm. And overall, this is a good thing because at least it's shown, even if the issue doesn't get taken up in the way that many would like, it shows the hypocrisy. And it shows the fact that there's a lot of pressure on politicians to back the war machine, especially Democrats, which, in the words of Tulsi Gabbard, have become the party of warmongers.
Yeah, and we should just remind everybody, Patrick, that the media or the television debate, which is taking place on Sunday, I believe, between Chuck Schumer and I've forgotten the name of the Republican candidate, which Diane Sayre has been banned from taking part in, or is not allowed to.
His name's Pinion, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's right. And so it is quite an incredible situation that she has developed a support within that area of New York for her candidacy, but she is still not entitled to take part in the democratic process.
Yeah, the system's rigged against independents. That's not just in New York. That's nationwide, in fact. And if you're running for president as independent, you got 50 different problems you have to overcome in getting on the ballot, getting on debate stages, and so forth. So it's funny quickly how they're making it exclusive against people like Diane Sarah, independent candidates, is they're saying you're not polling to a certain level. If she says, well, the pollsters aren't even mentioning me when they're doing the telephone polls because they've left the independent candidates out, of course, so that you can see the whole system in the so-called democracy, the leading beacon in the West is a complete sham when it comes to showing plurality among anybody who is not who's outside of the two-party duopoly.
Yes. Now, I interviewed Diane Sarah a week or two ago, and that interview still on the front page of the UK Column website. So if you haven't seen that yet, please do go and watch that. And she could do with support no matter where you live around the world.